Alright, welcome back to the channel today, ladies and gentlemen, and I should probably say a big welcome from Bangkok here in Thailand, but I'll talk about that later on in the week as to why I'm here. But today I wanted to just touch upon a topic we haven't talked about for a while here on the channel, just because it's very contentious, very controversial. Some people get very upset if you even mention Russia-Ukraine situation in any way, so I don't tend to talk about it as much anymore. But today I just wanted to give an update and talk about some aspects of it, from some of the weapons and funding and things like that, which I think are quite key at the moment. And just to let you know, I'm just recording on my laptop, so just the webcam on the laptop. I don't have any of my fancy equipment here. And I won't do for the month. I'm here for the entire month. So with that said then, let's go over to the shared screen here. So the first thing to make you aware of at the moment then, this has come out in the last week or so, up to 200,000 people in Poland are to be mobilized, or this is what the headline kind of leads with. So up to 200,000 Poles to be called up for military training. Now, when you get into the article a little deeper, it's actually less than that amount. But here we go then, up to 200,000 people can be called up for military exercises in Poland next year, including some who have never put their name forward for service but are deemed to have useful skills. The exercises can last up to 90 days, and failure to attend is punishable by jail or a fine. And I think this really just highlights how this is escalating now. This conflict that was supposed to be over within 2 or 3 months, they said at the beginning. Of course, we knew that wasn't going to happen. We knew it wasn't going to be only 2 or 3 months. And we knew that once the mass weapon industrial complex got involved and got their teeth into it, we'd see a lot more escalation, a lot more expensive weapons, a lot more countries and politicians throwing in the hat as well. Oh, we need to ramp up military spending and all this other stuff. Why? Is this because these people are very kind-hearted? They're doing it all out of the goodness of their heart? No, of course not. These politicians are backed by lobbyists and all sorts of other things. I know people don't like it when I talk about this sort of thing, but it's absolutely true. These politicians do not get into power and hold that power without funding. So eventually they have to do something, give something back to these lobbyists. And I want to talk about that in a moment, actually, in terms of funding. But let's just look at why Poland is so crucial. So here's Poland here with this red line around the country. Here you have Ukraine, and then we have Belarus, Lithuania, Latvia. We've talked about these countries before on a video as to why these three countries, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, could be at risk as well, especially if NATO does get involved militarily. But here's Russia, this enormous, and most people don't even realize how big Russia is. I mean, look at the size of Russia. It is absolutely enormous. I just don't think people appreciate the sheer size of Russia. And this is why I find it interesting when we hear all the propaganda. And of course there's propaganda from both sides, don't get me wrong. But we keep hearing all this propaganda about how Ukraine, this tiny little country that doesn't have the most effective military. So let's just put this into perspective here. Ukraine here is somehow defeating Russia. They're annihilating, as the CNN and BBC and a couple of others love to say every day. This tiny country is annihilating the power of Russia. Yeah, I'm sorry to say, not to offend anyone, but Ukraine is not annihilating Russia. In fact, I saw a story just the other day talking about how for every 10 Russian troops that are killed, only 1 Ukrainian troop is killed. Actually, this isn't true. You can really dig into these statistics. I'm not going to go into it all because people get upset when I, talk about this sort of stuff, but the statistics are almost the opposite. It's somewhere in the region of, for every 6 to 8 Ukrainian and foreign, because remember we've got a lot of mercenaries, I don't know if I should use that word, but a lot of foreign fighters as well that are fighting in and for Ukraine against Russia. But somewhere in the region of every 6 to 8 Ukrainians are killed. So these are military for every 1 Russian soldier. So that is the more accurate statistics. But of course, you're never going to hear that on the mainstream media. But to finish up on the Poland article then, it says here we are talking about specializations that are very important from the military's point of view. I mean doctors, nurses, paramedics, IT specialists, drivers and lawyers. This is a narrow group of people who have specific skills and specific qualifications and whose service in the Polish army would be very useful. Now, until 2009, Poland actually had compulsory military service for men, but that was scrapped in favour of a fully professional army. And we know a lot of countries have gone this way in terms of rather than subscription or conscription, they've actually gone to a professional volunteer-based army instead. However, in recent years, the growing threat of Russia has pushed the government to seek to increase the size and strength of the Polish armed forces. In 2017, a new territorial defense force was established. This year's Homeland Defense Act foresees a doubling in the size of the armed forces from the current 143,500 troops to 300,000 troops. So that will be 250 professional, 250,000 professional and 50,000 territorial. Now, let's just move over to the UK then. And remember we talked about this article. So this was all about Operation Mobilise, where the Chief of the General Staff said he was going to mobilise the British Army, the British military, but not just that, but also the reservists, the territorial army, and the civilians. Remember, he also said he's going to be mobilising civilians. So this article says the Chief of the General Staff intends to mobilise the British Army to deter Russian aggression and prevent war as part of new plans for the service. Now, let me just put this into perspective. Think of the size of Russia, and we also need to include China in terms of their army as well, and some of the other BRICS nations. Do you honestly think that the British Army getting more ready with the tiny, tiny military, yes, it has great equipment, some of the best training in the world. I was British Army myself. I was a sergeant in the army, so I know that the military is extremely professional, one of, if not, top 5 most professional militaries in the world. But does that mean that just by sort of getting it more ready, a stronger sense of readiness, that Russia is going to be deterred from any more sort of conflict in Europe? I don't think so at all. I just don't think that the British Army, British military, is big enough to deter the beast that is Russia. Now, another topic that we are seeing in the media a lot is all around funding. So who's actually sending aid to Ukraine? And I think, well, you probably won't be surprised if you watch a lot of YouTube here, but it's not what you would expect. Let's look then. So the European Union, imagine the size and how many wealthy countries are in the European Union. Well, it announced to send 2 major packages of 330 million euros and 500 million euros in humanitarian funding early in the war. So that's not a lot of money. That's a very small amount of money. So you think about that, we're talking 830 million euros in total. So let's just call that 900 million US dollars. Well, what's the US sent? The US government has announced several packages of emergency funding for Ukraine, with the latest worth $40 billion. Yes, $40 billion. And I think the military budget was something like $45 billion in terms of weapons included. So split relatively evenly between military support and humanitarian aid, according to the New York Times. So I do think it went from 40 to 45 billion was the final total. Many details of the spending are still to be fleshed out, and updates will be recorded on the funding platform when more is known. I always think it's funny when they use the word channeled, when more is known about how the funding will be channeled. Yeah, I think we've heard a little bit of that recently, how this funding is channeled and maybe channeled in other ways as well. But we won't go there. The United Kingdom then has committed a total of £1.5 billion, so 1.7 billion, in humanitarian and economic aid for Ukraine, according to a government website. It has sent another £2.3 billion of military aid. So you look at this again. UK is 1.5 billion, the United States 45 billion, European Union 800 million. Okay, so there seems to be a bit of a disconnect there. But we had this come out in November then, Aid to Ukraine explained in 6 charts. So US aid to Ukraine totals $68 billion. This is money, by the way, that the United States doesn't have. In fact, the United States has a debt level of $31.5 trillion, a debt that will never be repaid. The citizens, it's just not possible. It's about $250,000 it works out for every taxpayer or every citizen. It's a huge amount of money. This debt is never going to be repaid. They're going to keep rolling it over. But with the interest rates going higher, this is, I mean, it's a huge, I just did a video yesterday, it came out on my private community. If you want to watch that, it's about an hour long, and it really goes into the most complex minutiae of macroeconomics globally, and talks about everything from Federal Reserve to Bank of England, European Central Bank, and interest rates, and how this will affect the stock market and housing market and all these other things. If you want to see that video, I'll drop a link below to the private community. So I won't go into it all here because it would take me at least half an hour to cover it all. But what I want to just get across to you is that, in essence, this debt for the USA in particular will not and probably cannot ever be repaid now, which means that it's only a matter of time that this dollar supremacy does reign supreme. Eventually it will have to collapse under its own weight. Now, does that mean it's going to happen this week, this month, this year? No, I would say most likely not. But in the future, yes, I think every currency has a shelf life, every fiat currency in particular. And then we're going to see a new era, which will be very interesting, will be these CBDC, central bank digital currencies. Some, like the BRICS countries, put in one together, which will probably be gold-backed. So this will really change the game and make things very interesting. But back to the screen here, I think it's quite obvious then that most of this aid is all coming from the United States. All the other countries are really not doing very much at all. So it makes you wonder why the US, with all the problems it's got, and with not having enough funding for, I think it was school dinners, school meals for the kids this week, has gone up by 250% in terms of inflation. And the US is saying that it just can't help poorer families to pay for these meals, yet they can send $45 billion to Ukraine. It's baffling. In fact, if you were to calculate how much it would cost for the school meals, it would probably be in the millions, and yet there's billions going to Ukraine for a war that, and I'm sorry to say this, I don't mean to offend anyone, but it cannot be won. Not by, Ukraine alone and Ukraine military. It would need NATO and a lot of other militaries to get involved. Russia is just too big and it's too powerful. And even with all these, new weapon systems and missile systems and all of this as well, and I'm talking about the HIMARS system here, these things cost $3 million per rocket. I don't know if you're aware of this, but $3 million per rocket. And each time, bear in mind the batteries are so small that the US sent over there. Some call it an escalation. I don't know if it's an escalation or not. They really didn't send enough over there to make a huge impact, but it will help to save lives, obviously. But you've got to think about this. And again, I'm not 100% on the figures, but I would assume they would fire 2 rockets, again, just an assumption here, for each missile. This is fairly typical, and if you were in the military, you know that if there's a rocket coming in, you're going to fire 1 or 2 rockets to intercept it. So let's just say they did fire 1 or 2. That's $3 million or $6 million. And the US is funding this, by the way. That would have paid for all those meals on its own. And this even came out just a few hours ago on BBC News. Russia plans to exhaust Ukraine with prolonged attacks. So what they're talking about, a lot of it, is drone attacks. It's not just Russia doing it, Ukraine is doing it as well. Just this week, it killed 63 Russian troops with one of their attacks. And they made this statement on Monday. Russia's defense ministry said Ukrainian forces fired 6 rockets using the US-made HIMARS rocket system at a building housing Russian troops. Well, that cost $18 million. Just so you're aware of that, those 6 rockets cost $18 million. I mean, it's staggering the price of these weapon systems. So you think that the Ukraine is using this at the moment, but it requires a lot of technical training to actually operate these systems. There just isn't enough of them in the country as well, and they're very, very sophisticated. And Ukraine has already said, the defense secretary said, it needs 50 more of these to stop Russian forces advancing, and 100 more to launch a successful counter-offensive. Well, unfortunately, there just isn't that sort of military hardware available, and if the US had it, would they send it, or I'm not sure. It would cost an absolute fortune. So that's just a real quick update today on the situation over there. I don't see this ending at any point in the very near future, because there's too much money to be made out of this war. A lot of high-profile people have already tried to have peace talks and bring everything together, and they just get shot down. Stay out of it, it's none of your business, and things like that. We don't want peace talks. And this tends to happen in these situations as well, because you've got to bear in mind the people who are responsible for a lot of the decisions, they get very emotionally attached, as you would do. This is human nature. Now, you think if somebody came out and attacked your family physically and someone was killed or injured, would you be wanting to have peace talks right away? Probably not. You'd want to retaliate or something like that, or at least you'd want to see justice served against those people. So this is another reason why the people that are most emotionally connected to it don't want to have peace talks. But a lot of it is also influences from other governments who may be giving a lot of funding, who may be making a lot of money from weapons and other things that we won't go into. But overall, just understand that what we see in the media is not always the true case and accounts of what's going on the ground. If you want to know what's the truth, you should really listen to a lot of the military who have gone over there as volunteers, or actually gone over as mercenaries, have been paid to go over and fight, and then they've come back home. There's obviously a reason for that, and there's a lot of these stories online that you can listen to, very interesting, and that'll tell you a lot more than what the mainstream media puts out on a daily basis. All right, well, that's all for today. Take care, God bless. I'm not sure if I'm going to keep up the sort of daily routine video here, because I am trying to take a nice little holiday while I'm here, but I will be posting fairly frequently as normal. All right, see you next time. Bye now.